Hello, friend. Don't look behind you while I'm telling you a story. Story 1. My name is Ellie, 31 years old, living alone in a small town in Oregon. I moved into a new rental house just 2 months ago. It's an old wooden bungalow on the edge of a residential area bordered by a thin line of trees with low hills in the back. The previous owner was an elderly woman who passed away. The house had been vacant for nearly a year before I moved in. The rent was suspiciously cheap, but I signed anyway after the divorce. I couldn't afford much. The house has 2 floors, not large. But the lower level is a bit strange. Low ceiling, narrow stairs, and a damp smell like the earth beneath had. Never fully dried. I rarely go down there, just left a few boxes of old things and locked the stairway door. I don't like that space. It always feels like someone had lived there for a very long time, then vanished, but never truly left. The first 3 weeks were peaceful. I worked day shifts at a convenience store and spent my evenings reading or listening to podcasts. But on the 22nd night, things began to change. It started with small noises, like something being dragged slowly across the floor downstairs. Very slow, very faint, but consistent. I thought I was imagining it, or maybe it was rats. But whenever I really strained to hear it, there was nothing. At first, I laughed it off, told myself old wooden houses always creak. But eventually the dragging sound came every night, precisely at 1:12 a.m. on the dot. I began timing it with a clock. I tried checking the basement in daylight. Just dust, cobwebs, and my boxes. I even sprinkled powder along the baseboards too. Looked for rodent tracks. Nothing. But that night, the dragging sound came again, and the powder had been disturbed. A section had been wiped clean, as if something heavy had scraped through it, not footprints. Just a long dry streak. I started losing sleep. My nerves stretched thin. Yet strangely, my days at work felt totally normal. No one knew anything. I didn't talk about it. My friends lived in other cities. My mother and I barely spoke since the divorce. My ex-husband used to say I was paranoid, always convinced things were worse than they were. But this time, I knew. Something was wrong. I bought a cheap security camera and mounted it near the basement door. It connected to my phone via Wi-Fi. The first night, nothing happened. The second night, at exactly 1:12 a.m., the camera flickered out for about 5 seconds, then came back. I checked the footage. No movement, but the audio was strange. A long, tired sigh. Like someone leaning against a wooden wall. Right next to the mic, I started sleeping with all the lights on, barely getting 2 hours a night. Some nights, I'd hear light tapping behind the kitchen floor directly above the basement. 3 taps at a time, as if someone was trying to keep rhythm. I cleaned the house more thoroughly. Checked every vent, every pipe. Everything was intact. By the 5th week, I got a letter from the landlord. A middle-aged man named Raymond, handwritten. He asked if I'd noticed anything unusual about the basement, and if so, to call him immediately, no matter the hour. No explanation. I called the same day. His voice was low, almost like someone who'd had a stroke or mental issues. When I asked if he knew what was happening down there, he went silent for over 10 seconds, then said, "You should move out. Don't try to understand." I asked why. He replied with only one sentence, "That floor is not meant for new people." I didn't get it. I began digging deeper. Searched online. Checked old news archives. Nothing but some old house for sale listings from 8 years ago. I found a local town archive and stumbled across a short record from 1984. A woman named Margot disappeared in this area. Her body was never found. The last known address matched mine. The document was faded, but one line remained. Neighbors reported hearing conversations from the basement, though the woman lived alone. That's when I started hearing whispers from downstairs at night. Couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. One time, it even sounded like someone whispering my name very close, even though the basement door was locked up. Then one night, I woke at 3:44 a.m. to see the basement light on. I was sure I turned everything off. When I approached, I saw the basement door cracked open. The lock had been removed, lying at the base of the stairs. as if someone had deliberately left it there. I called 911. The police came, searched the entire house. No one, no signs of forced entry. They told me it could be psychological and suggested I take a few days off work. I nodded just to get them out. I also asked them to take the camera footage for analysis. They promised to look into it. 3 days. Later, I got an email from an anonymous sender. No message. Just one attachment. A still image from the camera from that night. It showed a corner of the basement under dim yellow light. And in the middle of the frame, someone sat on the floor. Back turned, hair long and matted, one leg bent sideways as if broken, head slightly tilted like they were listening. At the bottom of the image, a single line was scrawled. "You're not supposed to be here." I don't know who sent that photo, nor how they got it. But the moment I saw that tangled, matted hair, a chill ran down my spine. That wasn't me, and it wasn't anyone I'd ever met. The way that person sat wasn't natural. One knee folded to the side like it had been dislocated. Head tilted slightly back, not facing me, more like listening to something far away. It didn't feel like seeing an intruder, but like someone who had been there long before I arrived. I didn't tell the police. I deleted the photo, but every night after that, I kept dreaming about it. The face was always obscured, but I see that figure sitting in the basement, slowly, painfully turning its head toward me. Each time I woke up gasping, my back soaked with sweat. Some nights I heard footsteps in the hallway, shuffling slippers brushing against the wooden floor, moving toward my bedroom, then stopping. But by morning, nothing was there. I gathered all my courage and called Raymond, the landlord, again. The number was no longer in service. I tried tracing the address from the envelope. He'd sent the one from just a few weeks ago and found it belonged to a memory care facility 3 hours away. I called and asked if Raymond was still there. They told me he'd passed away in March, but I had received the letter less than 3 weeks earlier. I started losing the ability to tell what was real and what wasn't. One afternoon, coming home early from work, I found the front door slightly open. I was sure I'd locked it. I didn't go in right away. I stood on the porch and looked through the gap. The door to the basement was wide open. No lights were on, but I heard someone saying something faintly, like a whisper. Very soft, very steady, as if repeating a sentence. It wasn't calling. It was the voice of someone reading. Like they were reading my name, but never finishing the syllables. I turned and ran to the neighbor's house and called the police. When they arrived, there were no signs of anything unusual. The doors were locked. The basement door was shut. No one believed me. But one officer, man in his 40s, who looked like he wasn't new to cases like this, pulled me aside to the patrol car and quietly asked if I'd heard anything. I nodded. He told me that 2 previous short-term tenants had left the house in the middle of the night, never asking for their deposits back. They hadn't been harmed, but they'd fled in a panic. One left behind a small notebook, filled with a single repeated sentence. "I am not supposed to know." I begged him to let me see the notebook. A week later, he mailed me a photocopy with no return name. In it, near the end, was a section where the writing was so deeply scratched the paper had torn. But I could still make out the words. "The basement isn't for storage. It's to keep someone in." I decided to leave. I didn't care about the deposit. I didn't need to take anything. I just packed my documents and some cash. But on the last night, as I was dozing on the couch, too afraid to sleep in the bedroom, I heard a sound I hadn't heard of. Footsteps coming up from the basement. Not dragging, stepping. Clear, steady, deliberate. I opened my eyes but didn't move. My feet felt like they were plunged into ice. Everything was silent, and then the sound stopped right behind the couch. I could feel it. Someone standing there, close enough that I felt a breath brush the back of my neck. I didn't turn around. I just shut my eyes and counted my heartbeat. After about a minute, it all stopped. The house was silent again. I stood up, walked out without locking the door, and drove all night to the farthest rest stop I could find and rented a motel room. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer, they left a voicemail. A woman's voice, hoarse, tired, said just one sentence. You left your name in the basement. I don't understand. But I feel like the name Ellie, the one I used to think was mine, isn't really mine anymore. I stutter when people ask my name. I forget how to spell it when filling out forms. Every time I try to remember, I hear that whisper in my head, you're not supposed to be here. I'm renting a room in another town now, not using my real name. Every night, I still dream of that basement. I see the figure sitting there, back turned, head tilted toward the ear, like waiting for me to say something, but I can't speak anymore. Because I understand. Those who go down and try to understand, always leave something behind. Some leave their sanity. Some leave their memories. And me ... I think I left myself. I left Oregon that year thinking everything would fade with time. I rented a small room in Northern California, changed my name to Lena, didn't register a new social security number, left no forwarding address. I worked odd jobs at a laundromat, kept to myself, barely spoke to anyone. But the shadow of that basement never let go of me. It didn't follow me with images or sounds. It followed by erosion, very slow, very certain. Some mornings I'd look into the mirror and see my face, but couldn't remember my name. Once, a store clerk called out Lena, and I just stood there, unresponsive. It wasn't that I was pretending to forget it. It felt like the name no longer stuck to me. It had slipped off, left behind on some level of my mind, like I had abandoned it in that basement dot. Then I started noticing something different in the way people looked at me. A coworker once said, every time I look into your eyes, I get chills. I didn't reply. I didn't feel much of anything. Not sadness, not joy, not anger, not desire. Everything was flat. And stranger still, sometimes I had the distinct feeling someone was watching me through the mirror. Not a hallucination. More like another version of me behind the glass, standing, still, silently watching. 3 months later, I received a letter. No return address. Inside the envelope was Polaroid. The basement room. Angled shot. A figure sitting with its back turned. But this time the hair was shorter. The build was familiar. It was me, exactly, how I looked when I first moved into that house, but something was wrong. I looked closer and realized something that froze me to the core. The figure had no face. I examined the photo under a magnifying glass. There were faint pencil marks on the back, thin as if someone had tried to erase them. I shaded them in with charcoal. The line appeared, you never left. You're just covering the shift for the one before. That's when I understood. The basement wasn't just a physical room. It was a level of consciousness, a place where those who were fragile, forgotten, or disbelieved gradually slid into without knowing. No one who went down there was killed. They were dissolved. Bit by bit, by making them believe they were still themselves while pieces of their identity were stripped away. Memory by memory until all that was left was silence. I was once Ellie. Then I became Lena. Now I'm no longer sure who I am. One night I woke up and didn't recognize the room I was in. I didn't know the day. Couldn't recall how I got there. I looked into the mirror, nothing. The glass was clear, reflecting. The room perfectly except me. I began hearing a quiet voice every night, not from outside, but from inside my own head. A familiar voice, my voice, but younger. Then, one night, I heard myself whisper, "It's someone else's turn now." The next morning, I got up early and walked to the post office. I sent a Polaroid of this rented room. A shadowed figure, sitting with its back turned, head slightly tilted. I didn't write anything on the back. I just knew one thing. They had to reach the next person. Someone who's about to rent a house with a locked basement. Because I was just covering the shift, and my shift just ended. Story 2. I'm not the kind of person who scares easily. I've driven across state lines dozens of times. Spent nights sleeping in my truck at gas stations, in the woods, even next to landfills. But that night, when I turned onto an unmarked narrow road, winding through a dense pine forest where the trees stood so close together, they looked like silent sentinels. I felt something was off. Snow started falling, suddenly, heavily. December in northern Idaho is always harsh, but this snow felt different. Like something or someone was trying to bury everything underneath. My wipers were working at full speed, but I still couldn't see past the front of my hood. I had decided to stop driving. The GPS had already lost signal a while ago. I was just hoping to find somewhere to stay the night. Nothing fancy, just a covered roof where I could catch a few hours of sleep. That's when I saw a small, old wooden house tucked against the edge of the forest, about 100 meters off the road. No lights on, but smoke was rising from the chimney. Someone was home. I pulled over, left the engine running just in case, and stepped out. The cold wind hit my face like needles. Snow already reached my ankles. I knocked on the door 3 times. No answer. I was about to turn back when the door creaked open. An old man stood there, small frame. Thin, with white hair standing on end like it had been shocked by electricity. He stared at me. His eyes were cloudy white, and he wore a hearing aid. He didn't say a word, just tilted his head and stepped back, leaving the door open. I understood the gesture and went in. The house was old but warm. A fire was glowing in the fireplace. A cup of tea sat steaming on the table. Everything inside was strangely tidy, unusually clean for such a weathered-looking house. I tried making conversation, asked if I could stay the night, but he didn't respond. He must have been deaf. He just walked silently into the kitchen, leaving me with the soft crackle of burning wood. I sat down in the chair, feeling a bit unsettled. Not afraid exactly, but something was off, like the space inside the house was too quiet. So quiet I could hear my own heartbeat when I closed my eyes. About half an hour later, the old man returned and motioned for me to follow him. I walked down a narrow hallway, the wooden floor creaking under every step. He pointed to a small room, single bed, flat pillow, a gray wool blanket. I nodded, thanked him. He nodded back and turned away, locking his door from the inside. I left mine as well, not sure if it was out of politeness or instinct that it should have ended there. But around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound, like a faint tapping wood on wood. I thought maybe it was a mouse, but the sound wasn't coming from the ceiling or the walls. It was coming from the floor right next to my bed. I leaned down. Nothing. I stood up and turned on my phone's flashlight. In the dim beam, I saw something that made my skin crawl. Near the base of the wall, the floorboards had a narrow gap, about a hand's width wide. The wood underneath had been pried open. I crouched down and shined the light through. Beneath the floor was a door, a small hidden hatch leading to a basement. What was strange was that it had been deliberately covered with boards on top, not a regular cellar door. A hidden one. I stepped back, heart pounding. I had no idea this house had a basement. Nothing about it earlier hinted at one. I lay back down, trying to convince myself I was just exhausted. But the tapping came again. This time, 3 knocks slow, even. Then, a long silence. And after that, I heard something. Whispering against the wooden boards. Not words. Just the sound of breath being forced through a crushed throat. Like someone was trying to speak, but their voice had been taken. I shot upright. The flashlight flickered. I felt it clearly now, a draft of cold air rising from beneath the floor. The air in the room had changed, not cold like snow outside, but damp, deep, the kind of cold that seeps into bone, the kind that only comes from somewhere far underground where light never reaches. Asterisk, I sat motionless on the bed for nearly 10 minutes, trying to keep my breathing steady. That cold sensation didn't fade. On the contrary, it seemed to spread slowly across the room, from the soles of my feet up to the nape of my neck. I've lived in many places, spent countless nights in cheap motels with creaking beds and thin walls, but I had never found myself in such a state of half-consciousness. My body felt frozen, yet my mind was unusually alert. And when I looked back at the floor gap I had discovered earlier, I saw it was open. The covering boards were gone. A wooden hatch had been slightly lifted, and from there, I could clearly see the wooden stairs descending deep below. There was no light down there, but I could feel the darkness wasn't empty. It was thick, dense like ink, as if the space below didn't belong to the same reality as the rest of this house. I stepped closer, stopping at the edge. A damp, musty smell rose from beneath, mixed with something faint, but strong enough to make me turn my head away, the scent of aged raw meat. Not the overwhelming stench of decay, but something fermented, old, and familiar. I didn't dare touch the door. It remained ajar, with no wind, no more sound. The old man upstairs had no idea. Or maybe he did, and chose silence. The entire house was now quiet to the point of suffocation. I went back to the bed, grabbed my backpack, and rummaged through it for the small knife I always carried on trips. Then I decided to shine my light down below. The flashlight from my phone trembled, flickering not because of low battery, but because my hand could no longer stay steady. The old rotting wooden stairs appeared, leading down into a square-shaped space. I held my breath and stepped down one stair at a time, trying not to let my steps make too much noise. Every creak sent a jolt through me. Dot at the bottom was a small basement, low ceiling, walls lined with dark wood. In the center was a table covered with a worn-out cloth. Around it were a few wooden shelves filled with tin cans and old glass jars. But what stopped me cold was the bed in the corner against the wall. The mattress had a deep indentation, as if someone had just been lying there until moments ago. I stood frozen for nearly a full minute. The air in the basement was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. I stepped back, almost ready to run, but something held me in place. A picture frame on the shelf near the bed, covered in dust, but I could still make it out. A young man, eyes staring straight into the camera. I didn't know why, but he looked familiar. Like I'd seen that face somewhere before. I picked up the frame, wiped off the dust. In the bottom corner was the year, 1983. A faded name, barely legible, but I could recognize the surname, the same as the old man upstairs. I remembered the nameplate next to the door. It only said Olsen, so this was someone in his family. A son? A grandson? Or was it him younger? That couldn't be Dot. Suddenly, a soft sound behind me, like fabric shifting. I turned. The bed that had the sunken imprint was now perfectly smooth, like no one had ever touched it. No one was there, but the cloth on the center table had fallen to the floor. I was certain it had still been on the table just moments ago. I stepped closer, bent down, and picked up the cloth. Underneath it was a notebook. Old, worn leather. The kind someone carries for years and eventually forgets. I opened it. Pages filled with small, dense handwriting. Scattered notes, dates, weather, descriptions of sleep, of noises at night, of a strange cold that slowly seeped into the bones. Each page became more erratic, the handwriting increasingly unsteady, mixed with red ink drawings, faceless figures, shadows standing in room corners, a door that couldn't be opened, and at the end, only one sentence repeated over and over again, covering the final 2 pages. Do not open the door. I stood there in silence. This basement wasn't just a storage space. Someone had once lived down here, lived long enough to write hundreds of pages by hand. But for some reason, that person was gone, and the hatch had been hidden. On purpose, I felt something pressing against my chest, as if I had just touched something I was never meant to touch. Dot as I turned to go back up the stairs. I heard footsteps directly above me. Someone was walking through my room, slow, deliberate steps. But there was no sound of a door opening. I didn't know if the old man had a key to my room. I couldn't remember whether I had locked the door from inside, but I knew somehow that someone or something was standing right above me. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, my phone light casting a shaky beam onto the wooden ceiling above. The footsteps had stopped, but the feeling that someone was waiting for me to come up was suffocatingly real. I couldn't hear the wind anymore, or the pines scraping against the window. The whole world seemed to pause. And in that moment, I understood something. If I climbed back up without knowing exactly what was waiting, I might not be able to come back down a second time. But staying here in this damp, rotting darkness felt no different than handing myself over to something that had been waiting for me all along. I gripped the folding knife tightly, took a deep breath, and climbed, step by step. The floor above remained completely silent. As I pushed the hatch open, the phone light cast upward, and I saw it. A single footprint faintly imprinted in the dust, right in the center of the room where I had stood earlier. A bare footprint, nothing else, no exit. No sign that anyone had left. The door I remembered locking was now slightly ajar. I stepped up, re-entered the room, eyes scanning everything. Everything was just as before, but wrong in a subtle way. The blanket on the bed was now neatly folded, like no one had ever touched it. My backpack was upright by the window, even though I clearly remembered leaving it at the foot of the bed. And the cup of cold tea I'd left on the table last night was now steaming as if it had just been poured. I stepped back, my hand still. Clenched the knife, but the cold rising from my chest had numbed my fingers. I called out loudly, my voice echoing through the house like it was being swallowed. No reply. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The house remained bathed in that same dim amber light. The old man's door was still shut, no sound from inside. I considered knocking, but stopped. Something inside me held me back. It wasn't fear of him. It was that I wasn't sure if a living person was actually behind that door anymore. I walked back toward the living room. The fire in the stove was still burning, but lower now. The house wasn't big, but now it felt endless. I tried the front door. Locked. Not a normal latch, but a heavy padlock, the kind used outside storage sheds. And the shackle was on the inside, as if someone was afraid I might try to escape. I looked around for the key. Nothing. The windows had been nailed shut from the inside, too. Every exit was sealed. I turned back down the hallway. A faint sound like someone taking a slow, deep breath came from the room I had just left. I knew no one was in there. I knew with a kind of certainty deeper than sight. Whatever was in that room now was not human, and I had awakened it when I opened the hatch in the floor. I tried to stay calm. I needed to find a way out before morning. I returned to the basement. Some instinct told me the answers were down there, but when I got back, the hatch was shut tight, and I couldn't open it again. I swear I hadn't locked it. The dust along the edges of the wood was smooth now, no sign it had ever been disturbed, like it had never been opened at all. I pulled out my phone to call 911. The screen showed only no service. Emergency calls only. No bars. I began searching the house, pulling open every drawer, every cabinet. Everything was eerily neat like a showroom. No personal belongings, no documents, no family photos, except for the one frame in the basement. This house had no history, no identity, just a shell ... alive, and then I found something strange. A floor plan, laminated, hidden behind a crooked picture frame in the living room. I spread it out on the table. It was the architectural blueprint of the house, stamped with the year 1982, a one-story, three-room house. No basement, none at all. I sat silently, staring at the blueprint. Every line was clear, every room in the exact place and size it should be, but there was no hatch, no crawl space under the room I stayed in. So what was that basement? Who built it? Why was it hidden? And why had someone lived down there before me? Then a memory flashed through my mind like lightning. When I saw the photo frame in the basement ... the name, I remembered it clearly, Olsen. But that face, that look, I had seen it somewhere. Before in the news 2 years ago, a man had gone missing while hunting in the nearby forest. His camp was found with all his gear untouched, no sign of a struggle. No blood, no footprints leaving, just gone, and the name Olsen appeared. Once in that article. Suddenly, I felt colder than I did standing in a snowstorm. Not the cold of the weather, but the feeling that I was being erased. Like I had stepped into a place that didn't belong to reality, and then suddenly the lights went out. Everything fell into darkness. Asterisk, I didn't have time to react before. The darkness swallowed the entire house. The only remaining light came from my phone, but it lasted only a few seconds before it blinked out, like something had squeezed it shut. I stood in absolute nothingness. No color, no sound, not even sensation. It felt like the world had been drained of air, leaving just me and a silent presence watching from every direction. Then I heard the sound. No idea where it came from. No way to tell if it was human or something else. Just a fragmented whisper. Like someone breathing right beside my ear but never touching me. A broken sentence, looping again and again, crackling like it came from a hollow throat. Don single quotes T dot 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 wait dot 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 dot. I closed my eyes, not to calm myself, but because I was afraid that if I kept them open, I would see what was standing inches away. From me, something that used to be human, or had once mimicked being human. Something tied to the basement, to the pages of that notebook written in a scrambled hand, to the door I never should have opened. The clearest feeling I had then wasn't fear, it was disorientation, as if I was slipping away from my own self. My consciousness being pulled from my body, drifting into another space where time no longer moved in a straight line. I saw myself standing in the basement. Then I saw myself sleeping in bed. At the same time, I was also watching from the ceiling as my own body walked through the dark hallway. 3 images, 3 states, all happening at once. And something else, a version of me, or something wearing my shape, was moving too, blending between those 3 spaces. I woke up the next morning in the old bed, sunlight leaking through the foggy window pane. Everything was unnaturally quiet. No old man, no scent of rotting wood, no trace that anything strange had happened the night before. I looked around, the room was the same, my backpack by the bed, my phone back on the network. But when I checked the photos, everything taken the night before was gone. Messages I sent had bounced back. No trace I had ever gone into that basement or seen that notebook. I stepped into the hallway. The old man's door was wide open, empty, no bed, no sheets, no furniture. Just a bare room covered in dust, like no one had ever stepped foot inside. I walked out of the house. Didn't lock the door, didn't look back. Just walked straight toward the old road. But when I reached the gate, I turned around one last time. The house was gone. Only an overgrown patch of land remained, scattered with mossy stones and a warped concrete foundation. No tire marks, no footprints. I stood there, frozen. My hand instinctively reached into my coat pocket and touched something small. It was the old notebook, dusty and frayed at the edges. I opened the first page. The first line was written in my own handwriting. Do not open the door. If you already have, never let it close again. I've kept that notebook ever since. And every night, exactly at 3:07 a.m., I hear footsteps echoing from beneath the floor of my apartment. A new apartment in a different city, but that sound never left me. Some nights I open my eyes and see faint bare footprints on the wooden floor. I no longer sleep in silence. I keep the TV on, the lights, a fan, humming, anything to drown out the sound I know will come back. Because once you've opened that door, it never truly closes again. It's inside your head, in the dark, and it remembers exactly who you are. Story 3. I found that room on Craigslist. A short listing, no pictures, no specific description, just an address somewhere in old San Bernardino and a rental price that seemed almost unreal. $300 a month, utilities included. In these times of skyrocketing costs, a temporary place like that felt like salvation to someone like me who just lost their job. The landlord replied to my text almost immediately. No interview, no deposit required. He only asked one question. Do you often hear noises? At midnight? I thought it was a joke, so I just answered randomly that I sleep deeply and never hear anything. He simply replied, good. It was an old brick house, tucked deep inside a narrow alley barely wide enough for a single car. I arrived in the late afternoon, as the sun was fading behind rusted tin rooftops. The neighborhood wasn't exactly rundown, but it felt out of sync. People kept to themselves. Porch lights came on earlier than usual. When I knocked on the door, a middle-aged man opened it. His skin was pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. Small, deep, cold eyes, no smile on his face. He just nodded silently, turned inside, not saying a word. The house smelled damp, but was clean to a soulless degree. White walls, wooden floors, no paintings, no personal belongings. Just the ticking of a wall clock echoing steadily throughout the house, though I couldn't see any actual clock. He led me to the end of a hallway and opened the door to the rental room. It was small, just enough space for a single bed, a wooden desk, and a window that looked out onto a cement wall. He said only one thing before walking away. Don't open the back door after 1 a.m. even if someone calls. I thought it was just some weird scare tactic from a bored landlord, so I just nodded vaguely and closed the door. The room felt colder than the rest of the house. I couldn't tell if it was due to poor insulation or its position near the alley's dark corner. I sat on the bed, opened my laptop, and started browsing for jobs. The Wi-Fi signal was weak but usable. When I turned on Spotify to fill the silence, it kept skipping and eventually switched to a strange track, no rhythm. Just a hollow hum, like a sound echoing from a sewer pipe. I thought my headphones were glitching, but when I unplugged them, the sound vanished. Everything returned to normal. I went to bed just before midnight. The hallway light still glowed through the door crack. The air remained cold. I didn't sleep deeply. Every time I drifted off, I dreamed that I was standing in this exact room, in the same position I was lying in, but with someone standing behind the door. No face, just a dark figure casting a shadow all the way to the foot of my bed. When I opened my eyes, there was nothing there, but the feeling was unmistakable. Something in this room was watching me, not from inside, but from outside. I woke up at 1:04 a.m. I didn't know why. There was no obvious sound, but my heart was racing. Cold sweat ran down my back. And then I heard a knock, very soft. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. Like fingernails, not knuckles. I stared at the door. No one was there. But the knocking came again, longer this time. Like someone was growing impatient. I remembered the landlord's words. Even if someone calls. I stayed completely still. My back felt glued to the mattress. Every muscle locked. Then the whispering began. Not through the door, but right beside my ear. A woman's voice, hoarse like she'd been crying. Please, open the door. It's cold, I can't come in, not unless you open. My eyes stayed fixed on the doorknob. It trembled slightly like someone was trying to turn it but didn't have the strength. I wanted to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. The whispering continued, fragmented, repeating. I don't remember how long I stayed like that. Just that when I opened my eyes again, morning light was seeping through the window. The door was still locked. Nothing seemed out of place. But I knew it wasn't a dream. Because there were scratch marks on the wooden door, 3 parallel grooves. Long, deep, and evenly spaced. Asterisk, I didn't leave my room that morning. I felt exhausted. Like after a high fever, my head heavy as stone, my body limp. But what kept me from stepping out wasn't physical. It was the scratch marks on the door. 3 long gouges. Not very deep, but so precise they couldn't have been made by someone in panic. It was as if someone had done it very ... calmly. I stepped outside around noon. The landlord's door was still closed. I knocked a few times, but no one answered. Through the door crack, I caught a faint burnt smell like singed wood. But the house wasn't smoking and nothing seemed out of place. The whole house felt frozen in a moment outside of time. I wandered to the end of the alley, bought a coffee, trying to brush off the night before as a hallucination caused by stress. But the voice still echoed in my mind. I can't come in unless you open. That afternoon, I decided to check the back door. It was at the end of the hallway next to the laundry room. A thick wooden door, no handle on the outside, just an inner latch. I tried turning it. Still locked. But what chilled me wasn't the door, was what lay at its base. A small pile of damp soil, like muddy shoe prints, but without clear shape. Just a smudged patch, as if something had seeped in through the crack. I couldn't tell if it was water mud or something else. I told the landlord when I saw him walking through the living room at dusk. He didn't react much. Just tilted his head at me and asked, "You didn't open the door last night, did you?" I shook my head. He nodded, muttering so softly I could barely hear. "Good. If you had, no one in this house would be able to sleep again." Then he walked straight into the kitchen, saying nothing more. That night, I didn't dare turn off the lights. I pulled the desk against the door, propped up a pillow, and sat guard. But around midnight, fatigue overtook me and I drifted off. I dreamed I was in the same room, the back door wide open, wind rushing in. A woman stood in the hallway, her face hidden in darkness, but her wet hair hung down, her hands trembling with darkened fingernails. She said, "You left me out here too long, ... It's so cold. I was here before you ever came." I jolted awake at 2 a.m. The room was pitch dark. The lights had gone out at some point. The desk had been moved, and the back door was slightly ajar, open, just a crack. Cold wind seeped in, biting through to the bone. I didn't remember opening it. I stepped closer, my heart pounding loud enough to feel in my chest. I reached out to lock it, but before the latch clicked shut, I peeked through the gap. There was nothing outside, but not the usual kind of nothing. It was a void-thick darkness. No breeze, no movement, no wall, no floor. Like a hole had torn through reality. I froze, hand on the latch, unable to breathe. Something in that void was watching me, not with eyes, not with form, just ... presence. And then I heard footsteps inside the room directly behind me. I spun around. No one. But the bed sheets were pulled back. The pillow had fallen to the floor. The air smelled of wet earth, like a rotting sewer. I locked the door immediately, pushed the desk back, and didn't sleep a minute after that ... all night. I heard fingernails scratching very softly on the wall behind me. Not loud, not frantic, just a steady scraping sound from inside the wall. As if it had found another way in, the next morning I decided to leave. I'd packed my things in silence, left behind whatever I could. As I dragged my suitcase to the front door, I saw the landlord standing on the porch, staring at me. Not angry, not surprised, just ... staring ... he asked. "So you heard it?" I nodded. He frowned, then asked, "Did it call your name?" I was speechless. No one in that house knew my name. I never told anyone. I turned around and walked away, down the long alley, out to the main road, never looked back. I never returned to that place. But 2 weeks later, I received a package now. Sender's name. Inside was just a single sheet of old paper with a hastily scrawled message. "I still can't come in because you haven't invited me. But you leave your window open every night. Someday you'll forget." Story 4. I got the house-sitting job through an app for part-time student work around Buffalo, New York. The homeowners were an elderly couple flying to Canada to visit their newborn granddaughter, and they hired me to stay in their house for exactly 3 nights. The pay was generous, $500 for 3 days, with no real duties except turning on the lights each evening and checking the mailbox. I accepted right away, since my temporary place at the time was a roach-infested dorm. The house sat at the end of a quiet road, a good 15-minute drive from the nearest neighborhood. There were no neighbors around, just rows of bare trees and an old cemetery that pressed right up against the backyard fence. I got the keys from the old woman. She was calm and quiet and gave me just one instruction. Under no circumstances should you draw the kitchen curtains at night. No matter what you see, do not open the back door. I smiled and nodded, brushing it off as superstition. But once I stepped inside the house, I realized this wasn't a normal place. The smell was faint, but not like anything from a live-in home. It was cold and dry, like the air inside a long-abandoned morgue. Everything was too clean. No family photos, no plants, no signs that anyone had truly lived there. Every room had an old table lamp already turned on. The dim yellow light gave the whole house a constant dusk-like atmosphere. Even at noon after eating, I sat in the living room with my laptop. As the sky darkened, I heard the sound of wind chimes out on the porch. But the strange thing there was no wind. The trees stood still, not a breeze in sight. Yet the chimes rang out, slow and steady, like someone was gently touching them by hand. I got up, intending to pull the kitchen curtains closed. I didn't want to see the dark yard out back. But just as my hand touched the edge of the curtain, I remembered the old woman's warning: no matter what you see, do not open the back door. From the kitchen window, you could see straight into the cemetery. And at that moment, I saw someone standing among the graves. A figure, wearing a long, dirty white dress, with no visible face, standing perfectly still between the headstones. The moonlight made it just clear enough to see that it wasn't moving. I held my breath. The thought in my mind was crystal clear. If I pulled the curtain down, the figure would vanish. But if I kept staring, it would come closer. I didn't pull the curtain. I didn't look away. I just stood there, frozen, staring through the window like I was hypnotized. And just as I feared, the figure began to move, not walking, sliding forward, not touching the ground, no movement from the limbs, like it was being reeled in by an invisible string. I don't remember how I got out of the kitchen. I only knew that when I came to, I was curled up in the living room corner, the lamp flickering rapidly. Outside, there was still no sound. I didn't sleep that night, though. The next morning, I decided to leave. But the app required the full 3 nights to be completed for payment. I was broke. So, I stayed. That evening, I avoided the kitchen completely. I shut the door, barricaded it with a chair, and sat in the bedroom. But at exactly 2:19 a.m., I heard footsteps in the kitchen. Slow, heavy, deliberate, then the creak of a wooden door opening. I knew no one else had a spare key. And I knew the back door was still locked from the inside. The footsteps stopped. Then came tapping on the glass. 3 knocks. Silence. 3 more. I thought I was going insane. I covered my ears, buried my face in the pillow, and waited for daylight. At some point, I must have passed out. The next morning, I went down to the kitchen. The window was still shut, but on the outside of the glass, there was a faint handprint, like someone had pressed their face and hands to the window from the cemetery side. A place I remembered very clearly. No path, just cold ground and gravestones. I tried to call the homeowners to cancel the job, but no one answered. Both numbers returned no longer in service. I searched the address from the lease paperwork, but the only thing that came up was an old hospital abandoned since 2009, where a fire once killed 2 elderly patients trapped in the basement. I couldn't believe it. But the details matched. Names, dates, everything. It couldn't be a mistake. The final night, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in complete darkness, hoping that if I gave no sign I was still there, whatever it was. Outside wouldn't find me, but I was wrong. At exactly 3:03 a.m., a whisper sounded behind me, inside the room. "You forgot to pull the curtain, ... I jumped to my feet. The lamp wouldn't turn on. The entire house drowned in a bottomless darkness. I ran to the front door. The lock wouldn't budge. I heard the kitchen curtain shifting like someone was drawing it open. Then I heard footsteps, bare feet on the kitchen floor. But not one person, 2, 3, 4 more. The back door slammed open. Not by me, I was meters away. But I saw clearly the same figure that had stood among the graves was now stepping into the kitchen. And behind it, dozens more. Faceless, eyeless, human-shaped but twisted. They didn't walk toward me. They just stood there, filling the kitchen. And then, one by one, they turned to look in my direction. I don't remember what happened after that. When I woke up, it was morning. I was lying in the middle of the living room floor, clothes soaked through like I'd been caught in a storm. The back door was shut again. The kitchen curtain had been torn to shreds. I packed my things and left. I didn't take a cent of the pay, I reported the job on the app, but the listing was gone. No profile, no history. The house didn't even exist on Google Maps anymore, just an empty lot beside the old cemetery. 2 months later, I got an anonymous email. It said only that night, we didn't come in because you didn't turn the kitchen light on. Story 5. I rented a room in an old boarding house in Tacoma, Washington, after losing my job and no longer being able to afford downtown. The rent was suspiciously cheap, just $280 a month with free utilities and a month-to-month lease. The landlady was a middle-aged woman with silver hair, neither friendly nor strict. She only asked me one question before signing the papers. Do you sleep deeply? I figured she was worried I'd be disturbed by noise, so I just smiled and nodded at the house. Was U-shaped, 3 stories tall. I stayed on the second floor, in the last room at the end of the hallway. The hallway was narrow and long, covered in thin, worn-out carpet with a damp smell mixed with cheap deodorizer. Other rooms were occupied, but I rarely saw anyone come or go. When I moved in, I noticed the room next to mine was locked shut. The door was old and rotting, with scratches like it had been struck hard. I asked about it, and the landlady curtly replied, "Don't touch it. It's an old room, hasn't been used in a long time." The first night, I couldn't sleep. Not because the place was unfamiliar, but because the hallway was completely silent for hours. No fans, no pipes, no shifting bodies. Absolute silence. But as it got later, I started hearing footsteps, starting from one end of the hall, slowly. Walking toward the other, barefoot, slow, deliberate. I cracked open my door and looked out. No one. Every time, the footsteps would stop right outside my room, and then nothing. I stayed up the entire night. The next morning, I asked the landlady if anyone had passed through the hallway. She looked at me, blinked for a moment, then said, "If you hear footsteps and don't see anyone, don't open the door." They're looking for someone to take their place? I didn't understand. But the way she said it, cold and emotionless, made me stop asking. That night, I tried to convince myself I was sleep-deprived or hallucinating from stress. I played white noise through my headphones, turned on a nightlight, locked my door. But at exactly 2:11 a.m., the light cut out, my headphones died, and I jolted awake to 3 knocks on my door. I held my breath. Didn't move. The knocking was faint, like with the tips of fingernails, and silence. Then 3 more knocks. I was so scared I wanted to cry. But after about 20 minutes of nothing, I got up and pressed my ear to the door. There were no footsteps, but I smelled something strange. Burnt hair mixed with old urine, like someone had been burned alive and left to rot in their bedding. I bolted the door shut, shoved a chair under the knob, and stayed awake once again. The next morning, I checked the hallway. The room next to mine, the locked one, had a muddy footprint just outside. A single print, round and bare, like someone dragging a bare foot along the floor. I tried the knob just to be sure I was imagining things, but the handle crumbled off, like it had rotted from the inside. The door creaked open slightly, just a thin gap. I shouldn't have looked inside, but I did. The room was pitch dark, and the first thing I saw was a wall full of scratch marks, crisscrossing claw marks from fingernails, some still stained with dried blood. In the corner was a rusty metal bed frame, the mattress shredded like it had been mauled by an animal. And on the wall, scrawled in something dark and smeared, were the words, "Does anyone want to replace me?" I slammed the door shut. But from that moment on, I never slept peacefully again, no matter what I did. Earplugs, lights, locks. The knocking came, each night closer than the last. One night I lay still and heard a voice whisper, right beneath the crack of the door, "You're awake, aren't you?" "I can hear you." I decided to leave. I packed my things and went to find the landlady, but she didn't answer. I called the landline number printed on the lease. The number didn't exist. I knocked a few more times, then realized there was nothing inside her apartment. No furniture, no kitchenware, no sign of anyone living there. Just an old photo taped to the fridge. A picture of the second floor hallway with a handwritten note, last room, never let anyone stay more than 3 nights. I moved out that very night, packed silently, didn't look back. But as I was carrying my bags down the hallway, I heard a door quietly open behind me. No voice, no goodbye. Just the soft creak of a door. I never went back. But 2 weeks later, I received an anonymous envelope. Inside was my rental agreement, my name crossed out, and next to it, written in red ink, stayed 4 nights, new contract signed by... And the name signed was in my handwriting. But I had never written it. Story 6. I once rented a small wooden cabin on the outskirts of Missoula, Montana, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. I found it on an old, obscure website. The listing photos were blurry, but the price was incredibly cheap. I rented it month to month. Didn't have to meet the owner in person, just picked up the key from the lockbox on the fence. The cabin was small, single story, 2 bedrooms, isolated on a hillside. What unsettled me right from the beginning was a skylight window directly overlooking the bed in the main bedroom. I couldn't understand the design choice. No one installs a window to look down at a bed from the ceiling. At first, I thought it was a one-way mirror or maybe an attic access. But no, it was a real window with a pull-down curtain. Even though it was on the ceiling, I got a chair and climbed up to check. The glass was old, covered in dust, but the other side was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing. I looked around, but found no attic access, no hatch. The house had no second floor, no loft, so why was there a window there? That first night, I didn't sleep well. I had this constant feeling that someone was watching from above. I pulled the curtain shut, even taped the edges of the glass with duct tape. But every morning when I woke up, the curtain had been drawn open again, even though I clearly remembered securing it. It was like someone on the other side had pulled it back after I fell asleep. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things. So I set up my phone to record video overnight, pointed directly at the skylight. The next morning I reviewed the clip. Around 3:17 a.m., the footage began glitching, static, flickering, then a face appeared in the glass, looking down. Not clearly, but unmistakably a human face. The eyes were wide open, blank as if without consciousness. The face stayed still for 14 minutes, then suddenly disappeared. I felt a chill down my spine. I had no one staying with me. The house was locked tight, and there were no neighbors nearby. I tried calling the rental contact. The number was no longer in service. Emails went unanswered. The website was gone. That night, I slept in the living room, away from the ceiling window's view. But right at 3 a.m., I heard a faint rustling sound, like someone dragging themselves across the wooden floor. I held my breath, frozen. Then came the sound of breathing, soft, but clear, slow, and heavy, as if someone was lying face down against the glass, breathing into the dust. I turned on the light. There was nothing there. But on the glass was a small smear of round mark, shaped like a nose and mouth, as if someone had pressed their face against it from the other side. I took a photo, taped paper over the glass, and stuffed a comforter up against the ceiling too. Block it off. For the next 3 nights, everything was quiet. I started thinking maybe I'd just been overly stressed. But on the 5th night, while I was asleep, a loud bang echoed from the bedroom. I ran in. The comforter I'd shoved against the ceiling was on the floor, and the glass was cracked in. A diagonal line. But nothing had fallen. No one had broken in. The crack was from the inside, like something had struck it from the other side. I left that night, drove straight into town, filed a police report. They came to inspect but found nothing out of the ordinary. They said I might have sleepwalked or caused it myself due to panic. But when I handed them the hard drive with the camera footage, the file was completely corrupted. Only one image remained. A still frame from 3:17 a.m. showing a gaunt man in a hospital gown, face pressed to the glass, both hands on the window, edge as if trying to push through. I never went back to that house. But a week later, I received a small package with no return address. Inside was a shard of cracked glass, wrapped in a handkerchief with a note written in red ink. Someone finally saw me. Story 7. I once stayed with a friend while job hunting in Eugene, Oregon. He was renting an old single-story wooden house, tucked deep in a narrow alley, thick with trees. The house wasn't anything special, except for a separate outdoor bathroom. A small cement room with mossy, mold-covered walls, sitting about 4 meters away from the main house. It had a low roof, no windows, and stood completely apart. When I first arrived, my friend warned me, "Don't use the back toilet, just use the one inside the house." I asked why. He just shrugged. It's weird. I don't really know. I'm not a superstitious person. But the way he said it, the way he avoided the topic, made me pay attention. At first, I didn't think much of it, but a few days later, when the indoor toilet clogged, I had no choice but to go use the one out back. The moment I opened the door, a heavy, damp, metallic smell hit me. Inside, it wasn't dirty. Just ... too quiet. Strangely quiet. No echo at all. I tried coughing. No sound bounced back. I stepped inside and was about to lock the door when I noticed a thin crack on the wall behind the toilet. It stretched from the floor almost to the ceiling. It wasn't the kind of crack from age. It looked more like a seam, like 2 parts of the wall had been joined, or something had been sealed in. I backed out and returned to the house. But that night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of a toilet flushing, even though no one else was awake. I got out of bed. The indoor toilet was quiet, light off. The back door was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind, tapping against the frame. I stepped outside, looked toward the back. No one there. But as I stood still for a few seconds, I heard a dragging sound, soft, slow, coming from inside the outdoor toilet, like something being pulled across the cement floor. I walked closer, slowly. The door was still slightly open. Just one gentle push and I'd see inside. But right at that moment, a whisper came from the crack in the wall, right by my ear. "Where are you rushing off to?" I ran out the next morning. I asked my friend again. He froze, then let out a sigh and told. The house used to be rented by a family. Their youngest son had severe mental illness. They kept him locked inside that back toilet for months, never letting him out. One winter night, he killed himself, smashing his head against the wall behind the toilet, leaving a deep hole. The police came, took the body away, but the landlord didn't want to tear it down. He just patched over the hole with cement. Since then, every tenant had stories. Nighttime noises. Some heard knocking from the back toilet. Some saw the light inside flicker on by itself. One even said that when he opened the door, he saw a boy standing in the corner, facing the wall, whispering to himself, "It's not my fault, I just wanted to be quiet." After that, I never dared walk past that toilet again. I avoided it day and night. But one evening during a power outage, while I was getting candles from the kitchen, I happened to glance through the window. Out back. In the darkness, I saw a faint yellow glow flickering inside the outdoor toilet, like someone shining a flashlight outward from within. I screamed for my friend. But when we both ran out, the light was gone, the door was locked, no footprints in sight. My friend said that once, he tried chipping away at the cement over that wall crack to see what was behind it. But as soon as he started, a choking sob echoed from within, like an adult weeping through a crushed throat. He got so scared he trembled uncontrollably and had to call a priest to bless the place. 3 days later, we moved out. A month after that, I received a letter from the old address. Someone had mailed back a small hammer I had forgotten in the kitchen, wrapped in old newspaper. But it wasn't just newspaper. On the backside was a scribbled message in charcoal. "I'm still here, and I've learned to be even quieter now." Story 8. I once rented a duplex on the outskirts of Flagstaff, Arizona. The landlord was a middle-aged woman who lived in the other unit. She was fairly polite, always greeted me, but never spoke for more than 5 minutes. The unit I rented had 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen. Everything was fine, except for a persistent feeling that something was missing. I can't quite explain it. It was just that every time I walked through the hallway between the kitchen and the bedroom, I had this odd sense that there should have been a door on the left, if there was supposed to be a space there, but it had somehow been erased from view. I asked the landlord, "Has the house ever been renovated?" She shook her head. But that night, I found the original blueprint of the duplex in an old kitchen drawer, a printout from 1976. I looked closely and saw it. Between the smaller bedroom and the kitchen, there was an extra rectangular room. But in reality, that spot was just a solid wall. I couldn't sleep. I turned on the lights and stood exactly where that missing room was shown on the blueprint. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. I tapped on it, still silent. But, right. Then, I heard a knock in return. Very faint, very slow, like someone on the other side. I had just woken up. I backed away. My neck went cold. The living room light flickered once and then went out. The phone on the table buzzed nonstop, but no calls showed up. I ran outside and knocked on the landlord's door. She didn't answer. The next morning I came by again. She looked calm and said, "Don't try to find that room. As long as everyone believes it doesn't exist, it won't open." That sentence clung to me. I started seeing it in my dreams. A chipped wooden door, standing still between 2 white walls, waiting for someone to open it. In the dream, I always reach out to grab the doorknob, but never touched it. I always woke up just before my hand made contact. After 5 nights like that, I decided to check the wall for real. I grabbed a hammer and chipped away at a small corner. Behind it was a thin layer of bricks, then empty space. I stuck a flashlight in and saw a tiny, pitch-black room coated in dust, and what made my chest tighten was there was an old wooden bed in the center of the room covered by a moldy white sheet, and a pair of bare feet sticking out from under it. I didn't dare break it open any further. I patched the hole and tried to forget it. But that night, I heard someone walking back and forth inside the wall. The creaking floorboards sounded exactly like a real person moving. I took out my phone and recorded it. The next morning, I played it back. The recording captured breathing, right up against the mic. Then a woman's trembling voice, "Don't let her lock me in again." I moved out 2 days later. But before I left, I emailed the city's building office to ask about the original floor plan. They confirmed that the house originally included a small storage room between the kitchen and bedroom. But in 1980, someone applied for a structural interior modification permit. And after that, the room was never mentioned again. I asked who had lived there. They said the only person who's lived in that unit since 1980 is the woman next door, Mildred. The woman I'd been calling the landlord. I had never seen her leave her unit. But every time I walked past her window, I would always see her standing in the dark, staring over at me, motionless, unblinking. 2 months later, a friend sent me a local news clipping. 78-year-old woman found dead in house fire in Flagstaff. Cause of fire traced to faulty wiring inside a sealed wall, which was found to contain an unregistered room holding unidentified human remains. Story 9. Last March, I moved into a small apartment in an old complex on the outskirts of Cleveland. I had just gone through a breakup and needed somewhere cheap and quiet to be alone. The building was 3 stories tall, covered in patchy gray. Brick with narrow, damp-smelling hallways, but there weren't many people around, so I felt comfortable. The unit I lived in was apartment 3B, at the end of the second floor hallway. When I first viewed the place, everything seemed normal, except for one thing. The master bedroom had an extremely strange quality. More precisely, it had no sound, no echo, no reverb, no bounce. I had taken a basic acoustics course when I used to do sound for a small church, so I recognized the feeling of walking into a space that absorbed sound. And this room, damn it. It felt like it swallowed every noise hole. I clapped my hands. No echo. I shouted loudly. Still no reverb. Even the sound of breathing was pulled out of the air like it had never existed. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, all covered in old plaster. No special soundproofing. The window was sealed shut with duct tape from the inside. Completely unopenable. I figured the wall structure must be doing something strange. I didn't think much more of it. Even though on my first night sleeping there, I had the distinct sensation of being inside a sealed box. No air movement at all. I woke up at 2:44 a.m. with the overwhelming feeling that someone was standing next to my bed. No sound, no strange lights, just a clear, unmistakable sense that someone was leaning in. Only centimeters from my face. I turned the light on. No one there, but the blanket had been pulled to one side. The bedside lamp was tilted far to the edge. I checked my phone camera, which I had left recording overnight. The video cut off at exactly 2:42 a.m. file error. Pure white screen. On the second night, I tried playing soft music to calm myself. But every time I stepped into the room, the sound vanished. The phone still played, the headphones still worked, but no sound came out of the speaker as long as I was in that room, as if some kind of vacuum was surrounding the entire space. I told the building maintenance guy about it. After I finished talking, he went pale and said quietly, "That unit sat empty for nearly 6 years. The last guy who lived there didn't leave through the front door." I asked what he meant. He looked around, then continued, "They found him stuck to the ceiling of the bedroom, face down, no rope, no blood, just pressed flat against the ceiling like a statue. And no one ever figured out how." I asked why the room was like that. He stayed silent for a long time, then said, "The last tenant before you said, that room wasn't meant for the living. It doesn't produce sound because it's not entirely part of our world." I moved out the next day. But before I left, I tried one thing. I placed an old voice recorder on the ceiling, mic pointing, down at the bed, turned it on for an hour, locked the door, and left. When I played it back, most of it was total silence. But at minute 44 to 17, there was a faint, extremely weak voice. "I'm down here, and I used to think it was just a regular room too." A man's voice, low, heavy, but tired, behind it. A continuous stream of whispering, endless, as if hundreds of people were murmuring at once, but all speaking in reverse, forming a mess of chaos like wind sweeping through a frozen grave dot. After that, the recorder stopped working. I still have the audio file. I've never dared to listen to it again, but every time I open my laptop, that file name always pops back to the top of the list, like someone just moved it there. Story 10. Early last fall, I got a new job at a used bookstore located in the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. The pay wasn't great, but the job came with housing, a shared rental home with 3 other people, all older or introverted types, quiet. Exactly the kind of place I needed. The house sat at the end of a dead-end street. It used to be a pastor's residence. Most of the interior was still from the 1950s, wood-paneled walls, creaky stairs, and a musty scent, like half-burned incense, trapped deep within the walls. On the very first day I moved in, I found it strange that the lease never mentioned the basement, even though there was clearly a heavy wooden door with an old cast iron lock at the end of the kitchen hallway. I asked a housemate named Gary about it, and he simply said, "We don't use the basement. Pretend it's not there." I thought he was joking. But 2 weeks later, I realized he wasn't on the 10th night. I woke up to the sound of slow footsteps directly beneath the floor, like someone walking around in the basement right below me. My room was the old living room, located right above that area. At first, I thought maybe rats or someone had gone down there to get something. But the next morning when I asked around, everyone said, none of us have the key to the basement. I didn't believe them. I started paying attention. Every night between 2 and 3 a.m., the footsteps came back. Some nights, I also heard faint clanking, like metal chains being dragged across cement. I tried putting my ear to the floor, and for the first time, I heard whispering, faint, like a short prayer being repeated over and over, broken up by tense gasps, like someone struggling not to scream. I started losing sleep. I placed a recorder right on the floor and left it running through the night. In the morning, I played it back. The tape was full of static, and near the end, I clearly heard a quick, faint sentence. I've scraped all the way to the wood, but still can't get up. My blood ran cold. I began researching the house's history. Through a local archive site, I found an old article from 1963. A woman had gone missing in this very house. Back when it was still the parish home, she had been the housekeeper for the pastor and vanished without a trace. The article mentioned that the search turned up nothing, but a neighbor reported hearing faint screaming at night, continuing for months. The case went cold. I printed the article and brought it to Gary. He stared at it, then asked, "Did you see the little altar in the prayer room under the kitchen?" I nodded. He said, "Don't place anything on it. Not photos, not candles, not a single object. If you do, the basement will know you're trying to call it." I asked, "Call what?" He was silent for a few seconds, then said, "It's not calling, it's answering. It just needs someone to confirm they've heard it." A chill went down my spine. But my mistake was I went back into that prayer room, and that time I accidentally dropped my lighter onto the altar. I bent down to pick it up, not thinking much of it. That night, for the first time, the basement door opened. I woke to the sound of cold wind pushing up through the floor, a sharp smell of mildew and dried blood rising like it had just been disturbed. I left my room and stepped into the hallway, and saw the basement door slightly ajar, swinging gently. No one was there, but beneath the door I saw scratch marks, fingernails clawing into the wood, as if someone was slowly pulling themselves up, using bare hands to pry it open inch by inch. I rushed over, slammed it shut, braced it with a chair, and turned on every light. But all through the night, I heard fingernails tapping on the inside of the wooden door. In a slow, steady rhythm, 3 knocks, then silence. 3 knocks, then silence again. The next morning, I told Gary. He nodded, then handed me a slip of paper. "Write your full name on this." I asked why. He said, "If it ever asks your name, don't answer. If it calls your name correctly, that means it's already climbing." I wrote it, gave it to him. He placed it in a drawer beneath the altar. That night, the basement was silent, but 2 days later, I found the slip of paper had been pulled out. My name was crossed out in red, ink and rewritten in a completely different handwriting. Stiff, angular strokes with an extra word added between my names. Belongs to. I left that house in the middle of a rainy night. Didn't ask for my deposit back, took nothing with me except my backpack. 3 months later, I received a small package with no return address. Inside was the lighter I dropped and a blank piece of paper with a handwritten message. "Whenever you're ready, the basement is still waiting."